2, 1. Well, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, everybody. This is a very special edible talk coming to you from the Green Market with Professor John Wilson and Nicole Toby. We are getting ready for our Radiant Health Festival. And in preparation for that, I had a conversation with Professor Wilson. And as we talked about his field, which I say is paleobotany, he said, well, Vicki, we can talk about eating ecologically. And as soon as he said that, I thought of my dear friend, Nicole Toby, who has graced the Green Market many times with her expertise, and said, do you want to come and talk about eating ecologically? And she said, yes, she would do that. So these are two extraordinary people who have had many interests and long careers in different areas. And I just want to highlight that because the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary interaction is somehow a way to get to certain kinds of solutions. So we have John, who has a doctorate in earth and planetary sciences from Harvard. He's studied computer science, geology, and is now head of environmental studies at Haverford. So that's a very quick introduction. And Nicole has left her career as a lawyer, as a corporate lawyer, and went on to get a bachelor's in human nutrition and dietetics. She has a diploma in institutional and community dietetics and many other certifications related to childhood and adolescent obesity, and in particular, people who have diabetes. And so with that introduction, I am going to let these two people who in our prelim talked about their love of botany have a conversation with each other about what it might mean for all of us to eat ecologically. And I will throw that out as the first question, which is, what is eating ecologically?
Let me put in my 2 cents first, because I know John's is going to be very complicated. So with my clients, when I try to get them to eat in a more sustainable fashion, a lot of them are poor people. So I have to they're older and they're poor, so I have to phrase it in a different way. So we talk about a more plant-based diet because it's cheaper. We talk about um, waste. We talk about not wasting food. So that requires them to make a menu and shop from the menu so that at the end of the week there's nothing left, and also to shop in their fridge to make sure and be creative to make sure they use every single thing. And we talk about buying things local as much. But I don't say locally because of the carbon footprint. I say locally because it's healthier. It's actually not cheaper. It's more expensive, which is a problem. But I tell them that it's more nutritious if it's been kept for a shorter time. So if the shelf life if it's been recently picked, it's more nutritious. So therefore they should eat and to try to get them to grow their own food. Now, if I was addressing a younger audience, they would be more conscious of the environment. The audience don't really want to hear about that. They, as far as they're concerned, probably be dead by the time it's a problem. So they're not worried about cheap food being cheap and food health. But you can achieve the same result by just couching it in different terms. So that's my idea of eating logically. But I'm sure Jonathan has a lot more to say than that.
Nicole, I'm really struck by the conversation that you had with your clients, because the way that I normally have these conversations is with young people. So I'm a college professor, so I'm talking to students who are 18, 19, 20, 21, maybe 22. And I use almost exactly the same reasons and language that you use with your clients as well. Because I've found over the years that the sort of overarching thing is that there are lots of different reasons that you might want to, like, I really love your phrase, going shopping in your fridge. I really like that idea. To sort of look at and sort of pay close attention to where your food comes from and to eat more of a plant-based diet. For a lot of my students, it's the first time that they're living away from home. So they're sort of learning how to take care of themselves in a healthy way. There's always the story of the undergraduate student who eats out of a vending machine in a building for 6 months. And, we sometimes have these conversations about that. But it's a lot about getting, people at a young age. Or the conversations that I have are getting people who are at a young age to kind of pay closer attention to what's going on around them. And I think, motivating people to eat locally for any reason, whether that's the increased health, because just as you said, the shelf, things that haven't been sitting on a shelf are significantly healthier. Plant-based diets can be cheaper. They honestly should be cheaper. We have a complex system of food subsidies that kind of skews things in, negative direction for all sorts of reasons. But I think one of the overarching things that I talk about with my students is getting young people aware of the seasonality of food. Like, where does the food actually come from? The fruit that you like, the complex dishes that you like, where do the ingredients come from? What's actually going into it? And being a little bit more aware and just connected to the food and the food ingredients that they're consuming every day. So, for some people, they're very persuaded by the environmental and the carbon footprint argument. For some people, they don't engage with that very much at all, but for them, it's more of a health issue. And I'm sort of, I think whatever road you take to get to that endpoint, I think that's a great path to be on.
And people say, what every single day, I mean, including today, they say to me, the vegetables are too expensive. So everybody is hypertensive and it needs to be on a DASH diet and they need to have more vegetables, but they say they can't afford it. So but on the other hand, they say they don't think back. I said, if you didn't buy any meat, you probably could afford more vegetables. They don't think that way, so you have to kind of tell them. Long ago in Trinidad, people used to eat only on weekends. For people had beans during the week. And I'm saying, that's the healthier way to be. People were healthier in those days when they ate peas only. So can you go back to that? Can you go back to eating the but just eating peas during the week and vegetables? But still, we've had floods here, terrible flooding. So the price of vegetables has been astronomical. So that is a big problem for us in terms of trying to persuade people. You have to tell them, well, just eat what's cheap. You don't have to worry about variety now. Just eat what's cheap. Choose a vegetable that's cheap and eat that one. And that's the one in season this month. And like that. But so yes, generally, it sounds like we're saying similar things. But is there anything that we're missing that we should be telling?
That's a great question. I think this is food and intersects so many different areas in society. I mean, just what you just described. The cost is the end result of all kinds of things. It's the integrated result of the transportation, the agricultural process, and the labor that's gone into it. The different countries heavily subsidize or have tariffs on different foods as well. And then, of course, there's climate events and environmental events that act as these huge shocks to affect people. And I think it can be difficult for people to kind of wrap your head around. There's so many factors at play here. Where do I start? Where do I start thinking about it? And I think what I've often advised people just in casual conversation is to, no step is too small. Like
Right.
it's creating habits and insights that over time, ideally will accumulate. Is that the kind of conversation that you have with your clients as well?
Yeah, but it's not couched in terms of the environment at all, but it's couched in terms of their health and trying to get them to grow their own food at home, just a little bit of a difference and so I have to be aware of what's easy to grow. So I have to try to do it at home and see what's easy and suggest, okay, you can do this. to the market and ask the man, okay, what's cheap this week, and be aware of what's cheap this week to go and tell them. It's like that I have to do it. Can't do it in terms of the environment at all. But if I had a younger audience, I know that would, and people, the clients at the free market tend to be younger, so that the people who are watching this video tend to be young, and they will be interested in environmental impact. They are going to care about the environment. They're going to be living long. So it's going to be more of their problem to deal with. So that, but I was also interested in forward, because I see that you are doing in terms of studying how plants adapt as the environment changes. And I wondered if some of that might be relevant. I mean, okay, so what happens to plants? Do they just become less? Is the yield just less, or do they just wither up and die? What is likely to happen? And is there like a trajectory? Are there certain kinds of plants that happens more to? And should we be choosing those plants, or certain kinds of plants store more carbon? Should we be choosing? Who's making these decisions?
Oh gosh, these are wonderful questions, Nicole. These are really these are things that that keep scientists, in my field, up at night. And in just about every aspect of the food and sort of plant industry, there are people who are studying this, and to the point where people are making maps of different areas, and they will make a map that will predict under this sort of global emissions scenario, this is what's likely to be the most extreme temperature in this area, and that's the limiting factor for this particular type of agricultural crop. So farmers who are on the ground in this place now should start thinking about changing from, this variety of apples, for example, to maybe this variety of a different crop. And I know in the United States, there's a lot of outreach that's going on and conversation with farmers about this. The problem is, because these are organized at such large scales, it often doesn't the information doesn't sort of trickle down to everybody who might need to know, for their garden, what's my garden going to look like in this neighborhood in 30 or 40 years. But in general, there's a movement from scientists, like myself, to kind of encourage people to think about planting for, if you plant a tree now in where I live in Philadelphia, so between Washington and New York City, the tree will be fully grown in 60 years. So, the tree will be fully grown in, roughly the year 2080. So what is the climate going to look like in 2080 in this particular place? And I actually do some work of outreach, of just communicating with people, like, these are the types of trees that we should be planting now. They're not the same as we would have planted 60 years ago. We need to be planning for 60 years ahead. But it is a complex problem. It depends on the level of stress for plants. In general, we kind of know at a global picture, as we emit more carbon, the planet is going to get warmer, and the kind of extremes are going to get more extreme. So we think that rainfall events are going to become more intense, but drought is going to become more intense. And there's some plants that can withstand that kind of change in stress. And there's some plants like wine grapes, for example, where that's likely to be too much for them in certain places. So wine growers, for example, are very concerned about climate change because their product is so climate sensitive. But citrus growers, on the other hand, their crop isn't quite as sensitive to climate. So they're still concerned, but they're not concerned to the degree that wine growers are, or grape growers for wine are. Does that make sense?
Sure, but I mean, we could do without citrus, we could do without wine, but what about staple crops? What about wheat and rice and grains and things like that?
Yeah, there are tremendous efforts right now from agronomists looking at wheat varieties. And for wheat, for example, the big concern is excess drought stress. So wheat is generally a dry crop. And so it is used to, or it can survive reasonably well for drought of a certain intensity and a certain duration. But people are worried that because we grow a lot of wheat in dry areas, if droughts are going to become more intense, we need wheat that's going to be able to withstand additional drought. So there's a huge effort to identify particular genes or particular wheat varieties that can withstand these. And people are, there's papers coming out in the scientific literature, almost every 6 months on a new variety or gene that's going to hopefully allow wheat to be grown in places if droughts continue to become more intense. Rice faces similar kinds of stresses as well, but this is sort of a very, very active area of agricultural research right now.
That's a bit, but I mean, for instance, you hear that in India, at a certain point, nothing will be able to be with that. With there are parts of India where nothing, just a desert, just too hot. We haven't been told that for our area. That doesn't mean it's not true. It's just that we haven't been told it. Do you know if working on that is for the Latin American region? This work?
Yeah, one of the largest wheat centers is in Mexico, actually, and they do a lot of work on wheat and corn, and they have a particular focus on the Caribbean. A lot of wheat production is in sort of higher latitudes as well, so they're sort of looking at those kinds of climate regimes as well. But yeah, everybody is working as everybody that I've ever talked to who's worked on this problem is working sort of with the clock in the back of their mind, that these are problems that you can't kick this off 10 years and hope that somebody in 10 years is going to come through with a breakthrough. That the time to be working on this and to be working hard is right now. And yeah, there are a lot of, as we map out these scenarios, these environmental scenarios, there are some maps that are shocking. That it may be difficult to grow much of any staple crop in a particular place under a particular, and I know a lot of scientists have spent a lot of time sort of waving these maps and trying to call people's attention to this, that it's really a call for urgent action now.
Yeah, and as dietitians, we're concerned about, we're telling everybody for this plant-based diet, are there going to be enough plants for us to have this plant-based diet? Or should we be looking at something instead? But of course, the insects are protein. They can't substitute for the carbohydrate that you. But nevertheless, are we justified in doing this plant-based diet? There are no plants available.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to eat plants. I think there's significantly more than if you move beyond the sort of a few commercial varieties. There are lots of different plants that people can eat, and I think that maybe a hopeful way of thinking about this is that this might one of the downstream effects might be a diversification of diets worldwide. And how would that sound from a dietitian's perspective?
That's what I also try to do. That I try to, when I'm talking about ecologically, I'm talking about, we say it in a different way, but we're trying to encourage greater biodiversity in the diet. So we try to say, listen, each thing has a different micronutrient. So you need to eat as wide a variety of plants as you can, and don't just stick to the same time. So that it comes to that try and encourage diversity in eating, because there may not be enough of everything. So you need to make sure that you're eating a wide variety of things. But you couch it in terms of nutrition again, and that you don't get it from here, you're going to get it from here. And if you don't the same thing all the time, you only in nutrients. So you need to eat widely in a wide variety of plants. And long ago, people did. Long ago, children used to go, well, in the West Indies, we used to just go and pick things. There were trees and you just go and pick things. You didn't used to come home unless it was dark and in the day on a Saturday. Things off trees, you pick anything, and it wasn't so constrained in terms of this is my land and this is my land. You just used to go. So it was, so older people are accustomed to that. They're accustomed to all kinds of different things that we don't get anymore, because that's not what happens with farmers anymore. We had all different things to eat, all different kinds. Some of them weren't that nice, but you still ate them. And there was this great diversity. And yes, I agree that that's to be encouraged as well. But on the other hand, if things are, if there isn't a lot of any one thing, there is pockets of different things that can be cases, then the dietitian's work gets really complicated. You have to work out the nutritional value of all these things. It's not what we're accustomed to. So you have to be able to, and I guess that's that. Dietitians need to be doing that work. As you say that, yes, this is an important thing to do. Somebody still has to work out. I've seen somebody did it. I mean, but not like that. I've seen that somebody did ideal diet from was it the ideal diet from the point of view of the environment. That was done in terms of, you know, how much dairy, how much this, how much that, how much livestock, percentage. That was done by a group of scientists. But nobody went further to say, okay, don't have this, you're going to eat more of this, and this has less of this and less of that. So that's interesting. That's an interesting area of potential work, actually. Sparking my interest there.
Well, that's excellent to hear. I'm going to pipe in here because there is a big question about the diversity of what we eat. We have, in the Western diet, we've restricted ourselves to rice, wheat, and corn, largely. Sorghum has started to be talked about, barley a little bit, millet a little bit, but these other grains have been tossed away. So we don't talk about that. Apples and oranges, we talk about them. We you know, John, when you talk about these trees that you're planting 60 years to grow, I mean, when we plant a mango tree here, we're talking 7 years if it's not grafted, 5 years. So we get a lot of diversity, but we have also rejected much of the diversity that is here, and we've gotten rid of it. So you don't see the fruits that you used to see in the tropics either. And we have a lot of import substitution. So, you know, my question to both of you now as we come to a close is about the plant resilience and how the plants might really teach us a little bit more how to be resilient if we were observing them more closely.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Vicki. I think from if I can put my my plant hat on and imagine myself, you know, a mango tree, I generally think that especially in the tropics, plants are incredibly resilient. You know, they are the plants that are around us today are the product of, you know, several 100 million years of evolution and adaptation to climatic extremes that are, you know, would seem, you know, science fiction-y, that they've passed through this this history. And so I think giving the space for plants and putting plants back, you know, where they once were, and they aren't at the present, but they could be again. I like thinking of plants as they're pretty tough. They can bounce back if you give them the nutrients that they need, and mostly the space and time and little corner of the environment. What do you think, Nicole?
I don't know. I don't know the extent to which, I mean, I gather that many plants have become extinct. So the ones that are left are the ones that are fairly resilient, at least at this climate. These are the ones that are left and they're resilient. But Vicki's wanting to know what would we learn from plants in terms of how we become resilient. I'm not sure what we would learn. I guess, I mean, we have to learn adaptation. We have to learn to adapt to the situation that we're in. And the situation we're in is that we want to do whatever we can, which is eating ecologically, to prevent the 1.5 increase in temperature. Those are the things we talked about before, the waste and the eating locally and all those kinds of things. That's what we can do. And apart from that, in terms of adapting ourselves to the situation, I would imagine it is just what we talked about, plant-based diet, trying to learn to eat from a more diverse of food so that we have more options available to us and we aren't so limited in maybe explore eating insects, things like that. that are less, maybe what we're not used to, but being more open to trying new things. And that's what plants had to do, they had to adapt to changing situations. I guess that's what we have to learn, to be more adaptable and to learn new ways of eating in order to achieve nutrition and health.
John, do you have any further thoughts?
Nicole, you put it beautifully. I can't underscore any more than that. I think everybody wins if we think about it this way. The plants win, the people that eat them win, the environment wins. I think this is that's a really wonderful way to leave it.
Well, thank you both. I found that this was very fascinating. There's still a lot left to try to discuss and suss out about biodiversity and resilience, and certainly, how this, practically how eating in a different way can reduce the burden of non-communicable diseases, which is very high and which is one of the things that we are really trying to address. Trinidad has very high rates of diabetes, I think 38%, heart disease, stroke. So there's just too much sugar, too much salt, too much processed food. And so it will be great to move towards being more plant-like. So thank you, Professor John Wilson of Haverford College, and Nicole Toby, dietitian and nutritionist. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us, Vicki.
Yeah, take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye.